She was 81 years old, standing in a parking lot with $60 in her coat pocket and nowhere left to go. Her own daughter had handed her an envelope with $200 and a month to disappear, as if 40 years of a life could be folded up and mailed to a facility with yoga on Tuesdays. Marion had done what she always did. She managed. She held herself together. She didn't ask for help. But on a cold October morning, with the money nearly gone and every door quietly closing, she stopped in front of a hand-letter sign on a chain-link fence. A storage auction. Minimum bid $1. Nobody wanted Unit 314. Too small, too rusted, contents unknown. Marion raised her paper and bid $1, and nobody argued. Inside, the unit was almost empty. A collapsed chair, a cardboard box, 3 jars. And on the back of the door, written in black marker by a hand she didn't recognize, a phone number. And beneath it, a single word. Her sister's name. Agnes had been dead for 12 years. Marion's phone was already in her hand before she understood what she was doing. What happened when someone answered that call is one of the most quietly devastating and ultimately breathtaking things I have ever had to tell. Because Agnes hadn't just left a name on a door. She had been watching from 20 years away, preparing for exactly this moment. Building something in silence that her sister didn't know existed, and making absolutely certain it would still be standing on the day Marion needed it most. Stay with me, because this story isn't about loss. It's about what love looks like when it refuses to leave you unprotected, even after it's gone. Don't leave yet. We're about to open a door some wanted to keep closed. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment wherever you're watching. The envelope was already on the kitchen table when Marion came downstairs that Thursday morning. Her daughter Renata hadn't even waited for coffee. She was standing by the window, with her arms crossed, wearing that particular expression Marion had learned to recognize over the past 2 years, the one that meant a decision had already been made and this conversation was merely a formality. "Sit down, Mom," Renata said. Marion sat. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in Renata's careful handwriting, was a number, 200, followed by a sentence Marion read 3 times before it fully landed. "This should be enough to cover a deposit somewhere comfortable while you get settled." Get settled. As though Marion were a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. "I've already spoken to a woman at Sunrise Gardens," Renata continued, not looking at her. "They have a lovely room on the 2nd floor, bright windows. They do yoga on Tuesdays." "This is my house," Marion said quietly. "It's in my name, Mom. Has been for 6 years. You asked me to handle it after your surgery, remember? You said you didn't want to worry about paperwork anymore." Marion remembered. She remembered signing something at the kitchen table, Renata's hand guiding hers to the right lines, saying, "It's just administrative. It doesn't change anything. You'll always live here. This is your home." She was 75 then, and still recovering, and she had trusted her daughter completely. Why wouldn't she? This was her daughter. "You have a month," Renata said, finally turning from the window. Her voice wasn't cruel. That was almost the worst part. It was patient and measured, the tone of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and is now delivering it on schedule. "I think that's very reasonable. I've already called 2 places in addition to Sunrise. I can send you the brochures. The 200 should cover a deposit at any of them." Marion looked at the $200 on the table. "And the rest of my things?" "I'd have a service come. Whatever you can take with you, they'll handle." "Handle," Marion repeated. "Mom." For just a moment something crossed Renata's face. Not guilt exactly, but the ghost of it. "You're 81 years old. You can't keep up this house alone. The roof needs work. The furnace is making that sound again. I have my own family to think about, my own expenses. This isn't easy for me either." Marion stood up from the table. She picked up the envelope with the $200 inside. She didn't say anything else, because she understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that there was nothing left to say. Renata had already moved on in her mind. Marion was already gone. She spent the month quietly. She packed what mattered: clothes, photographs, her reading glasses, the small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to her mother, and 2 framed pictures she kept on her nightstand. One was her wedding photo, the other was Agnes. Agnes, her younger sister, dead 12 years now from a stroke that came without warning on an ordinary Tuesday in September. Marion had never fully recovered from losing her. Agnes had been the person who called every Sunday without fail, who remembered every small thing Marion had ever mentioned, who had known Marion, the real Marion, longer and more completely than anyone else alive. After Agnes died, Marion had become quieter. She hadn't realized how much of herself she'd maintained for Agnes's benefit. The part that still laughed easily, that still had opinions about things, that still felt worth knowing. She took Agnes's photo when she left. The first week after the month ended, Marion stayed in a budget motel off the highway and called the numbers on Renata's brochures. Sunrise Gardens wanted $1,800 a month plus a deposit of equal size. The second place was similar. The third didn't have availability for 3 months. Marion did the arithmetic quietly in her motel room and understood that $200 was not in fact enough to cover a deposit anywhere, and that Renata either had not done this arithmetic herself or had done it and chosen not to mention the result. By the second week, Marion was down to $60. She had applied to 2 places that operated on sliding scale income assessments and been told the waiting lists were 8 to 14 months. She walked a lot. There was nothing else to do, and the motel charged by the night, and she needed to make the remaining money stretch. It was on one of those walks, a Wednesday morning when the air still had the bite of early autumn, and the leaves were just beginning to turn, that Marion passed the parking lot of the old commercial building on Garrett Street, and saw the hand letter sign zip-tied to the chain-link fence. Abandoned storage auction, today 10 a.m., minimum bid $1. She stopped. She read it again. She had no plan beyond the fact that she had nowhere to be and a long walk ahead of her, and the sign said $1. The parking lot held perhaps 20 people, mostly men in work jackets standing in small groups and talking with the ease of people who'd done this before. They had the look of professional pickers, alert, calculating, holding coffee cups and studying a clipboard one of them was passing around. Marion stood at the edge of the lot, and a man with a yellow vest and a key ring the size of a grapefruit nodded at her. "You bidding?" "I might be," Marion said. He handed her a paper with a number on it, 17. "Keep it visible when you bid. Units go fast, most of them, except the last few." He glanced down the row of orange metal doors. "Nobody's going to fight you for those." The auctioneer worked quickly. The first unit went for $460 to a man who hadn't even finished his coffee. The second for $280. A large unit near the end of the row, full of furniture visible from the open door, triggered a brief bidding war that ended at $710. Marion watched and said nothing. When they reached unit 314, the auctioneer paused. It was the second to last unit on the far end of the row. Small, perhaps 6 feet wide, 8 feet deep. The door was streaked with rust, and one of the hinges had been repaired with something that looked like wire and optimism. The auctioneer raised his clipboard. "Unit 314, contents unknown. Door was sealed, no access prior to auction. We're selling it as is." He looked around the group. "Who wants to start at $1? Silence. One of the men near the front made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "What's the point? You can't even see what's in it." "That's correct," the auctioneer said pleasantly. $1. Anyone? More silence. Marion raised her paper. $1. The man glanced at her. The auctioneer looked relieved. $1 from bidder 17. Anyone at 2? Nobody moved. Going once? Going twice? He tapped his clipboard. Sold to bidder 17. 3 of the men in work jackets shook their heads in the particular way of people who have witnessed something they consider mildly foolish. Marion didn't look at them. She walked to the auctioneer, paid her dollar from the small fold of bills in her coat pocket, and received a key. The key resisted the lock. Marion worked it carefully, jiggling it the way you learn to with old locks, until something gave and the door rolled upward with the grinding protest of a mechanism that hadn't moved in a long time. The smell came first. Damp concrete and something else. Something faintly sweet and closed, like a room that had been breathing only its own air for years. Marion took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The unit was almost empty. A folding chair lay collapsed against the left wall, its fabric seat split down the middle. On the floor, a single cardboard box, not large, sealed with tape that had dried and cracked at the edges. Along the back wall, a shelf held 3 mason jars with their lids rusted shut, contents unidentifiable. That was everything. Marion stepped inside. The floor was cold through the thin soles of her shoes. She moved the flashlight slowly across the space, ceiling to floor, left wall to right. The concrete was bare. The shelf was bare except for the jars. The right wall was bare. She turned the light to the back of the door itself. Someone had written on it in black marker. Not scratched or carved. Written, deliberately and clearly, in a hand that pressed firmly against the metal. A phone number. 10 digits, with a local area code. And beneath it, a single word. Agnes. Marion's phone dropped 2 inches before her hand caught it. She stood very still. The flashlight beam held on the word. The handwriting was not familiar, not Agnes's looping cursive that Marion would have known anywhere, but the name was unmistakable. 7 letters. Her sister's name, written on the inside of a storage unit door that nobody had opened in years, in a parking lot Marion had entered by chance on a morning she had nowhere else to go. She was 81 years old. She had $60 and a motel room paid through Thursday. Her daughter had given her $200 and a month to disappear. Marion looked at the number for a long time. Then she pressed it, digit by digit, into her phone. And she called. It rang 4 times. Marion counted them, standing in the dim unit with the flashlight still pointed at the word on the door. On the 5th ring, someone picked up. Hello? A woman's voice, older, careful. My name is Marion Voss, Marion said. I'm calling because I found this number written inside a storage unit. Unit 314 on Garrett Street. The number was written next to a name. She paused. Agnes. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of someone absorbing something they had been waiting a long time to hear. Mrs. Voss, the woman said finally. Her voice had changed. The carefulness was still there, but something underneath it had opened. My name is Dorothy Klein. I was your sister's attorney. Marion put her hand against the metal wall of the unit to steady herself. Agnes came to me 9 years before she died, Dorothy continued. She said she wanted to make arrangements. Not just a will, she'd already done that. Something else. She said there was a person in her life who might one day need a door, and she wanted to make sure the door existed before she was gone. A brief pause. She described you exactly. She told me your name, your face, the way you'd sound on the phone. She said if you ever called this number, I would know. Marion closed her eyes for a moment. She rented that unit herself, Dorothy said. Paid the annual fee 12 years in advance out of her own pocket the week she made the arrangements. She said she wanted to make sure it would still be there if it took you a while to need it. The precision of it, 12 years, paid in full, calculated, was so completely Agnes that Marion felt it like a hand on her shoulder. She said something else, Dorothy continued. She said, my sister is the strongest person I know, and because of that, she will wait far too long before she asks for help. She will not call this number until she has truly run out of road. She told me to tell you, when you called, that she was not surprised it took this long. She said she was proud of you for surviving whatever brought you here. And she said to tell you that you are not starting over. You are arriving. Marion was crying. She hadn't cried once in the month since Renata handed her the envelope. Not in the motel room, not on any of the long walks, not during any of the phone calls to the Sunrise Gardens woman who kept saying lovely room and yoga on Tuesdays. But she cried now, standing on cold concrete in a 6x8 storage unit that smelled of damp air and years, because Agnes had known. Agnes had seen this coming from so far away that she had quietly built a landing place and kept the light on and waited. "What's in the box?" Marion asked when she could speak again. "Open it," Dorothy said. "I'll stay on the line." Marion set her phone on the shelf and put it on speaker. She carried the cardboard box to the center of the unit and knelt beside it on the floor. The tape had dried and cracked enough that her thumbnail broke through it without much effort. She folded back the flaps. On top, wrapped in a cotton dish towel that Marion recognized, blue stripes, slightly frayed at one edge, the kind Agnes had kept in her kitchen for 30 years, was a letter. A thick one, the envelope sealed and labeled in Agnes's unmistakable handwriting. "Marion, read this first." Below it, a manila envelope, legal-sized, held together with a rubber band that had hardened with age but hadn't broken. Below that, a small bundle of photographs wrapped in a rubber band of their own, and at the bottom of the box, nestled in a piece of folded flannel, an iron key. Old and heavy, the kind made before keys became small and uniform. A paper tag was threaded through the bow of the key with thin twine. On the tag, in Agnes's hand, 47 Birchwood Road, Calder Falls. Marion didn't know that address, but she set the key in her palm and felt the weight of it as though it were telling her something she needed a moment to understand. She opened the letter. Agnes had written 12 pages in her careful looping script, and Marion read all of them on the floor of the storage unit while Dorothy waited on the phone. The letter began the way Agnes had always begun things, not with preamble, but with the thing itself. "You are sitting somewhere uncomfortable right now, I imagine. Cold, probably. Knowing you, you've been managing on your own for longer than anyone should, and you've convinced yourself that's fine. It isn't fine. But that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because there are things I should have told you while I was alive, and I didn't. Not because I was ashamed, but because the timing was never right, and then the timing ran out. Agnes had owned property. That was the first thing Marion hadn't known. Not the house she'd lived in, which had been rented, but a small house in a town called Calder Falls, 2 hours north, that she'd bought quietly in the late 90s with money she'd saved over 20 years of careful private work. She'd bought it outright, no mortgage, and she'd kept it out of every conversation she'd ever had with Renata, who Agnes had not trusted. The letter was frank about this, in the way Agnes was frank about everything, and out of every family discussion and every document that might have made it visible to anyone who was looking. I bought it because I wanted to know that if something ever happened, to me, to you, to the particular arrangement of life that kept us both comfortable, there was a place. Ours. Not contingent on anyone else's goodwill or anyone else's paperwork. Just a place. The house had been left to Marion in Agnes's will, but the will had been structured through Dorothy's office in a way that kept it separate from the estate that had been publicly processed after Agnes died. Marion had received a small inheritance 12 years ago, a few $1,000s in savings, and she had accepted it and grieved and moved on. She had never known about the house. I didn't tell you then because you had your life arranged and you were fine, and I didn't want to make it strange between you and Renata. I know how much you wanted that to work. I know how much you needed it to work. But I left the number in the unit, and I paid for the years, and I kept the key with Dorothy in case a day came when you needed the door. If you are reading this, the day came. I'm sorry it did. I'm also, if I'm honest, a little relieved that you found it. The house was small. Agnes had described it in the letter with the directness of someone who wants no misunderstandings. 1 story, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a narrow window above the sink, a back porch that needed its boards replaced. She'd had a neighbor, a man named Howard, who maintained the property in exchange for use of the small outbuilding on the lot, checking on it twice a year. She'd arranged with Dorothy for the property taxes to be paid from a separate account that would run for 15 years. There were 5 years left on that account. "It's not grand," Agnes had written, "but it's yours, and the deed is clear, and no one can take it from you. I made sure of that. I was very careful about making sure of that." Marion sat on the floor of the storage unit and held the letter with both hands. She thought about the 12 years since Agnes died. She thought about the Sunday phone calls that had stopped, the silence that had moved in where Agnes's voice had been, the way she tried to fill it with other things and never quite managed. She thought about the 6 years she'd spent in a house that had stopped being hers without her realizing it, signing papers at the kitchen table and trusting the person handing her the pen. She thought about the motel room off the highway, the brochures, the woman at Sunrise Gardens saying, "Lovely room," in a voice that meant, "Don't ask too many questions." Agnes had known. Agnes had seen all of it from 20 years away and built a small, solid, unglamorous answer to it and kept it waiting. "Dorothy," Marion said. "Yes?" "The taxes. Is the account intact?" "The payments are current." "Fully current," Dorothy said. "The account has enough for 4 more years, 13 months from now. After that, the property taxes are your responsibility. The house itself is clear title, fully in your name as of Agnes's estate. Howard Paulsen still maintains the property. He's in his 70s now, but he's reliable. Agnes chose well." Marion looked at the key in her palm. "What condition is the house in?" she asked. Dorothy paused. "I had it inspected 14 months ago. The roof is sound. The plumbing needs some attention. There's a pipe under the kitchen sink that's been patched rather than replaced. The back porch boards are in poor condition, as Agnes mentioned. The interior is clean and dry. Howard keeps it that way." Another pause. "It's livable, Marion. It needs work, but it's livable." Marion nodded slowly, even though Dorothy couldn't see her. She put the iron key in her coat pocket. She folded Agnes's letter and returned it to its envelope and placed it carefully back in the box with the manila envelope and the photographs. She picked up her phone and took it off speaker and pressed it back to her ear. "I need to ask you something," Marion said. "Ask." Did she know this would work? Did she know I'd find it? She paid 12 years on a unit that had almost nothing in it. She couldn't have been certain I'd ever see that door. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. She said she wasn't betting on certainty. She was betting on you. She said her sister had found her way through everything life had put in front of her, and the storage unit on Garrett Street was not going to be the thing that stopped her. A pause. She also said you always had a habit of stopping to read signs. Marion stood up from the floor. Her knees ached and her coat was dusty, and outside the parking lot was filling with ordinary morning noise. A truck, someone talking, a door slamming somewhere down the row. She looked at the word on the inside of the door one more time. Agnes. "I'll be in Calder Falls by afternoon," Marion said. The drive north took 2 hours and 20 minutes. Marion had borrowed Dorothy's car. Dorothy had insisted in the manner of someone who had been waiting 12 years to be useful, and she drove with the iron key on the passenger seat beside her, and Agnes's letter in her bag and the box in the trunk. Calder Falls was small. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office the size of a garage, and a gas station that also sold fishing licenses. The kind of town that exists quietly and doesn't explain itself to anyone. Marion stopped at the diner to ask for directions to Birchwood Road, and the woman behind the counter wrote them on a napkin without being asked twice. The road was lined with birch trees that had gone gold overnight, the way they do in October, all at once and without warning. Number 47 sat at the end of a short gravel drive, and Marion pulled in and turned off the engine and sat for a moment looking at it through the windshield. It was small. Agnes had not lied about that. One story, white clapboard siding gone slightly grey at the edges, a front porch with a wooden railing that was intact and straight. The yard was tidy, Howard's work clearly, with the flat, raked neatness of a place that is cared for without being loved. 2 windows flanked the front door, both with their glass clean. A maple tree stood at the left corner of the house, enormous, so old it had to have been there long before Agnes found the place, its roots lifting one edge of the front path in a gentle arch. Marion got out of the car. She stood on the gravel drive and looked at the house the way you look at something you have been given that you are not yet sure you deserve. Then she walked to the front door and put the iron key in the lock and turned it. It opened without hesitation. The smell inside was clean and still. Not the abandoned smell of the storage unit, not the synthetic managed smell of the motel. Just air, undisturbed, and beneath it the faint ghost of wood and something floral that Marion couldn't immediately place. She walked through the front room slowly. A couch, older but solid, upholstered in a dark green fabric. A low bookshelf along one wall, empty. A fireplace with a clean grate. The kitchen was narrow, as Agnes had described, with a window above the sink that looked out onto the backyard and a stand of birches beyond the property line. The patched pipe under the sink was visible when Marion opened the cabinet, wrapped in tape that had held for now but wouldn't hold forever. She made a note of it. The 2 bedrooms were simple. The smaller one held a single bed frame with no mattress, a wooden dresser with brass pulls, and a window that faced east. The larger had a bed frame with a mattress, still plastic wrapped, and curtains in a pale yellow fabric that Agnes must have chosen herself because they were exactly the color Agnes would have chosen. Marion stood in the doorway of the larger bedroom for a long time. She had $60 in her coat pocket and no plan beyond this room. She had a patched pipe and a porch with bad boards and 4 years of taxes already paid by a dead woman's foresight. She had a key and a letter and a photograph of Agnes in her bag, and the maple tree in the front yard, and the birches turning gold at the property line. She had a door. Agnes had made her a door. Marion went back to the kitchen and turned on the tap. The water ran brown for 15 seconds, then clear. She cupped her hands under it and drank. Howard Paulson came by the following morning. He was a broad, unhurried man in his mid-70s with a grey beard and the particular patience of someone who has spent decades working with his hands and no longer feels the need to fill silence unnecessarily. He knocked at 8 and introduced himself without ceremony, and they stood on the front porch, and Marion thanked him for what he'd kept. Agnes was a good woman, Howard said, straightforward. Told me what she needed and paid what she said she would, and never asked for more than that. He looked at the porch boards, running the toe of his boot along a section that gave slightly. These need replacing. I've been meaning to get to it. I can do it this week if you want. I'd like to learn, Marion said. He looked at her for a moment. How's your back? Functional. All right, he said. I'll bring 2 hammers. They started the porch boards on Thursday. Howard was a patient teacher. In the same way, he was a patient man. He showed Marion what needed doing, waited while she did it, corrected her angle on the nail without making her feel the correction. Her hands were not young hands, and the hammer was heavy, and by the afternoon her arms ached from shoulder to wrist. She kept going. There was something in the physical work that Agnes would have understood. The satisfaction of a thing that is damaged becoming less damaged because you chose to address it, board by board, at whatever pace your body allowed. A woman named Cecilia from the house at the top of Birchwood Road appeared on Friday with a pot of soup, and the frank curiosity of someone who has decided to satisfy it directly. I saw Howard's truck, Cecilia said. I figured someone had finally moved in. She was in her late 60s, with short white hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Agnes used to come up some summers. Quiet woman. We'd have coffee occasionally. She talked about you. What did she say? Cecilia smiled. That you were stubborn in the good way, the way that lasts. They ate the soup at Agnes's kitchen table, Marion's kitchen table, and Cecilia told her about the town. The library was open 3 days a week. The diner did breakfast all day, and the coffee was reliable. There was a community garden behind the Methodist church that had more volunteers than plots, and they were always glad of an extra pair of hands in the fall for the end-of-season work. The hardware store owner, a man named Gerald, knew every house in a 20-mile radius and would give an honest estimate on anything that needed doing, which not everyone in that line of work would do. Marion wrote none of this down and remembered all of it. Renata called on a Sunday, 3 weeks after Marion had arrived. Marion was standing at the kitchen window, watching a pair of chickadees work through the remains of the seeds she'd scattered on the porch railing that morning. "Mom?" The careful, measured tone, practiced as always. "I've been thinking about you. I wanted to check in." "I'm well," Marion said. "Where are you staying? The Sunrise woman said you never confirmed the room. I was worried." "You don't need to worry." A pause. "Mom, I know this has been a difficult transition, but there are options. I spoke to Gerald. The place in Sunrise, they have a new room available, ground floor this time, very—" "Renata," Marion said. "Yes? I have a house." Silence. "What do you mean you have a house?" "I mean I have a house. It belonged to Agnes. She left it to me. I'm living in it now." More silence, longer this time, with a different quality. Marion recognized it. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. "I didn't know Agnes had property." "No," Marion agreed. "You didn't." "Where is it? Is it in good condition? Because if you need help with the paperwork or the finances, I could take a look, make sure everything is in order." "Everything is in order," Marion said. "Agnes made sure of that. She was very thorough." "Well," Renata's voice had taken on a brightness that didn't quite reach its own surface. "That's wonderful, Mom. I'm glad you have somewhere. I really am. And if you ever need anything—" "I'll be fine," Marion said. "I have Howard next door and Cecilia up the road and Dorothy handling anything legal. I have a porch I'm rebuilding and a kitchen with a good window and a maple tree that must be 80 years old at least." She paused. Agnes thought of everything. She said goodbye and set the phone on the counter. Outside, the chickadees were still at the railing, undisturbed, going about their business with the complete confidence of creatures who know exactly where they are. The photographs from the box in the storage unit, Marion hadn't looked at them until her second week in the house, waiting until she felt steady enough, were 23 in total. Agnes and Marion at every age. Childhood, gap-toothed and squinting into sun. Teenagers at some forgotten beach. Their mother's kitchen at Christmas, the year their father was already sick and nobody said so, but everyone knew. Marion's wedding day, Agnes just behind her left shoulder, laughing at something just out of frame. And the last one, taken maybe 2 years before Agnes died. The two of them on Agnes's apartment steps in the late afternoon light. Marion looking at the camera. Agnes looking at Marion. Her expression one of uncomplicated and complete love. Marion put that one on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where the morning light hit it. She looked at it every day while she washed her cup and watched the yard come slowly back to life with November frost and the particular quiet of a house that is occupied again after years of waiting. The porch boards were finished. The pipe under the sink had been replaced. Gerard's recommendation, a plumber named Ray who charged fairly and worked fast. The empty bookshelf in the front room had begun to fill. Books from the library sale and 2 boxes from a thrift shop in town that Cecilia had driven her to on a Tuesday with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a personal discovery. She was 81 years old. She had a patched-together set of tools she was still learning to use and a neighbor who came by twice a week and a woman up the road who brought soup and asked direct questions and expected direct answers. She had 4 years of taxes prepaid and a clear deed and an iron key that hung now on a hook beside the front door where she could see it every time she came or went. She had Agnes, present in the photograph on the windowsill and in the yellow curtains in the bedroom and in the 12 pages of a letter that Marion had read 4 times now and would read again. Present in the decision to buy a house and keep it secret, and pay 12 years on a storage unit, and write a name in marker on the inside of a door, and trust that her sister would stop to read the sign. Marion stood on her finished porch one evening in early November, the air cold and clean, and carrying the smell of wood smoke from somewhere up the road, and watched the light leave the sky. The maple tree was bare now, its branches clear against the last brew of the day. The birches at the property line had gone white again with the cold, their gold entirely given over. She thought about the parking lot on Garrett Street, the hand-lettered sign, the rusted door, and the empty unit, and the single word in black marker that had stopped her where she stood. She thought about Agnes 20 years ago, sitting across from a lawyer and describing a sister she trusted to find her way to a door when the road ran out. Describing her exactly, knowing her exactly. Marion put her hand in her coat pocket and felt the place where the iron key used to be before she moved it inside, and she stood there until the sky finished its business and the first stars came through. She was not starting over. She was arriving. Agnes had said so, and Agnes, as she had been her entire life, was right.